And now to talk about our module of the week, let's turn it over to Martin Anderson-Klutz, a Senior Solutions Engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a number of modules of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, Nick. Does your Drupal site need a flexible way to manage access to content? There's a module for that. It's called Access Policy, and it was originally created in November of 2022, so it's quite recent. The current version available is 1.0.0 Beta 1, which works with Drupal 9 and 10. It is actively maintained, so in addition to being just recently released, that 1.0.0 Beta 1 was actually just released in the past week. It only has 4 issues, none of which are bugs, and it does have test coverage. There are 12 sites currently using the module according to Drupal.org, and the module creator and maintainer is part digital. Now, the module works by allowing a site builder to define different policies that can be used to manage content access or editing capabilities based on a variety of factors, all defined within the Drupal UI. The criteria can include field values of the content, field values on the current user's profile, the time of day, and more. The policy can restrict access, for example, view access restricted to only selected people or people with a certain role or even a field value on their profile. It can also grant access, for example, to edit content based on the same kinds of criteria. Now, once defined, policies can be assigned manually, or they can be automatically applied based on configurable selection criteria. The project page describes this as an attribute-based access control architecture, which complements Drupal core's role-based access control that our listeners are probably already familiar with. Now, I used this module for the first time recently myself and found that given the power and flexibility the module provides, it's great that it has in-depth documentation because there's a little bit of work involved. I filed a couple of issues, so technically half of the open issues are ones that I filed, and Part Digital was very responsive in getting back to me. The module does also provide an API for defining your own policy type, access rules, rule widgets, and more. So if you need to set up even more custom than what Access Policy can provide out of the box, it's likely you can extend it to meet your individual use case. So let's talk about Access Policy.
So am I correct in that I first maybe heard about this at DrupalCon? Was this one of the Pittsburgh suggestions of including something similar to this in core?
I think there is a module that is basically the maintainer of that is the one who did the accepted Pittsburgh submission. It's similar, but I feel like that one is meant to be a bit more of an API, whereas this one really is sort of the like the fully UI realized solution you can sort of install and start to configure.
Got it. Either way, I think like this type of access policy or access control is super necessary and very interesting to me as far as why we haven't thought of this sooner, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Nick.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say this is really fascinating, and I think it's one of those things that it's a huge value add to the community. But I don't think most projects will need it. But it's one of those things where if a project needs something like this, it's a huge amount of effort to maintain and to. I see that it's supported by Pegasystems. It makes sense that a really large business is kind of behind it because to support the infrastructure to kind of build this from the ground up in a generic way, they must have hundreds of hours into this. I will say I'm curious when this will become supported by the security team, because anytime you have kind of out of the box, or maybe not out of the box isn't the right word, but more unique permissioning, I always wonder kind of what kind of security implications there are, because they must be doing some really, really interesting things to get a lot of those policies to work. So it's definitely something that I think the Drupal community will benefit from long term. It's going to give a lot of control that really just takes custom work in the past. So looking forward to see what happens with this.
Yeah, I feel like in my experience, as you say, it's not every site by any means that would need this kind of, content policy access. But I do feel like I've talked to a number of customers who say we want to give this team access to edit this section of the website. And that idea of like a section of the website is going to differ from client to
Yeah.
client. So it's definitely good that it's as flexible as it is. I have seen some implementations that use sort of more taxonomy based approaches. So like taxonomy access control or permissions by term are a couple that I think I've worked with in the past. I know at least one of those, when I used it, ended up requiring me to sort of like explicitly assign permissions to every vocabulary, which ended up adding a lot of complexity to the site. So something like this that's not, going to interact more broadly with taxonomy, to me feels like it's a better solution.
Yeah, this looks really cool. I haven't seen this one before, but we were talking about something internally similar to this for feature flags releases. So you can turn on and off features in production and release it to various different groups. And it seems like maybe it's worth investigating this to see how those policies are actually defined, because it could just be an extension of this, like outside of just the content editing experience, on how you define those policies and what triggers control that. Really, really interesting stuff. Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out. I'm just trying to figure out what the use case is for time-based access.
Like, well, so think of a preview link, for example. So I'm working on a project where we have token-based preview links, where you can get a link with a token that allows somebody to see a preview, and you can actually set that to like, hey, it's visible for one day. So like
no. Not length of time, like between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m.
Oh. So the idea, so this is interesting, because if again, this module is not necessarily fully related, but if you look at the Pittsburgh video suggesting that policy permissions be added to core, they talk about organizations that want to prevent their employees from working outside of business hours, right? So like, hey, you can only edit content between 9 and 5 because that's when you should be working. Otherwise, like, go do other things.
That's definitely
and that exact example is also on the project page as well. So I'm sure there are other creative ways that people think of that would make that useful, but again, it's probably not a thing that a lot of sites will need. So
rotating content entry windows. Yeah. Today's content entry window will be between 11 a.m. and 7 p.m. Good luck.
Yeah, depending on how granular you can get. I mean, there's also, for more applications instead of sites, there's like submission windows for users on certain form submission applications. Could possibly see that. Or for public sites, we've seen this for live chat, but it could be also tied into user applications that live chat's only available 9 to 5 because you don't have someone staffing it. So yeah, I mean, I think there's probably a lot of different ways you could go with that.
Oh man, I just thought of one is event, submitting sessions to an event, right? There's a certain time window for that. Granted, it's days, not hours, but
yeah.
I mean, I did also do a project in the past that was with a company in sort of the medical space. And so they would do kind of media releases of information before they would do it as a public release, kind of that embargo concept. And I feel like potentially there's a role for that in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting.
The possibilities are endless.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, I'm definitely looking forward to kind of seeing how this evolves, because it looks really powerful. Like I said, main questions are always security, team support, especially since it's access based, and I guess performance. I mean, the more like access checks you have to perform before something happens. Although I assume they're kind of using the default caching system for permissions. But I can see this project or this project allowing clients to have like 35 access rules for each piece of content. So the first load per user takes 5 minutes, and there's some questions about why it takes so long. But yeah, it looks like it definitely solves an issue that larger corporations have.
Yeah, one last thing I'll say on is, like, without doing this, the alternative is like maybe taxonomy based, but I don't know if you guys have ever built sites that had 20 or 25 different roles, but the role permissions table is kind of a beast.
Yeah.
And that UI becomes unusable after what, 8 or 9. So yeah, could be a good solution to that. But like you said, it can go the complete opposite way, and you could end up with
Yeah.
like, and I think back to my early days, SharePoint permission schemes with nested sites, and becomes a bit crazy there.
Yeah, the documentation page for this module does talk about role explosion as one of the things that it's trying to alleviate. So definitely aligned with what you said there, John.
Awesome.
Role explosion. Well, thank you, Martin. As always, a great module of the week. Appreciate you bringing this one up. And now on to our primary topic.